right, jumping the gun there a little bit, but President Obama originally saying that health insurance, the law will become law. This was back in 2010.
Today, after all the votes have been tallied, health insurance reform becomes law in the United States of America.
Well, there you go. President Obama saying that Obamacare has become law. Now another win for his signature health care legislation. The Supreme Court today, again, upholding Obamacare subsidies. And joining me now is Newsmax Deputy Health Editor and the author of the Obamacare Survival Guide, Nick Tate. So Nick Tate, you got a lot of important knowledge for us on what's going to happen now, but let's just take a moment to digest what took place here today. The decision, 6-3, somewhat of a surprise. A lot of folks had predicted a 5-4 ruling in this case, but Justice John Roberts apparently saving Obamacare again.
Well, you know, what this does is really places the onus back on Congress again. In some ways, Roberts and the majority in the court are saying, we are very confined by what we can do. We can only rule on what's written, and our interpretation of what's written is that these subsidies should flow to everyone in every state, whether the exchanges are run by Obamacare on the federal level or whether the states have their own exchanges. And so, to me, it once again kicks the ball back into Congress's court, and with Republicans controlling both branches, that may give them an opportunity, but it also presents some pressures on them to do something.
All right, of course, we've been parsing a lot of the early coverage of the decision today. That was an article from the National Journal. They're the ones who are using the headline, John Roberts saves Obamacare again. This is their take on the issue. Thursday's ruling will surely come as an enormous relief for the White House. President Obama has said that the court shouldn't even taken up the case. If the ruling had gone the other way, more than 6 million people likely would have lost their coverage, and insurance markets could have been upended in as many as 34 states. So that part of it's true. But the other side effect that people are feeling already, regardless of this current decision, is that health care costs are going up, whether you use Obamacare or not. That's
right. In the early years of the law, in fact, health insurance rates were continuing to rise, but they were rising at a lower level than they had the previous decade. But what's starting to happen now, since we've had the first 2 years of the requirement that people have to have insurance, is insurance companies are now folding into their plans those increased costs that are starting to hit. My interpretation is that in the early days, some of the sweeteners, some of the carrots of Obamacare really kicked in, and now we're starting to get some of the sticks, some of the costs. If you look at what the insurance companies have proposed for the year ahead, for instance, many states have double-digit price increases that are being proposed. In New Mexico, for instance, the lead healthcare company there is proposing a 52% increase in average premiums. Now, those rates are not likely to stick. Those are proposals. The states will go back and negotiate and likely knock them down. But even if they knock those rates down by half, we're looking at potentially double-digit health care premium increases in the next year, even though the Supreme Court has upheld these subsidies and the President says that means health care will be more affordable. The truth is we're going to pay more.
All right, so we're also looking for next steps. What's going to happen in Congress, also what's going to happen out there on the 2016 campaign trail. Let's talk about an article in the Washington Examiner earlier today, talking about how this ruling will certainly rock the Republican presidential race. Quote, I suspect that quietly a lot of candidates and congressional leaders are hoping the court upholds the law as written, leaving Obamacare as a whole intact for us to run against next year, speculated one Republican consultant based in Washington. So, you know, they have something to run against now. The question is, there are a lot of plans, a lot of options out there for Republicans to get behind. Which one is going to emerge as the one not only the Congress can back, but the potential nominee is going to be able to back?
That's right, and I think that the key thing here is for us to watch what the Republican candidates, particularly the Republican candidate who emerges as the likely contender against the inevitable Hillary Clinton, what he is likely to say is, or she,
Carly Fiorina.
That's right. You're right about that. My mistake. He or she says about where we should go with health care. The question too is whether Hillary is going to completely endorse the ideas of Obamacare and reinvent some of her own Hillary Care ideas, which could be interesting. So in some ways, this really does hand the Republicans an opportunity. We'll see what they do with it.
And the other question too, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, and we'll be joined by John Gizzi, our senior Washington correspondent, to talk about this, is this process of reconciliation, which is a little bit complicated to say the least, but it is one way that Republicans may force the president to veto an alternative to Obamacare. Would be a very big litmus test for the GOP candidates as well. Nick Tate's going to stick around with us. We're going to have some more headlines coming up for you at the other side of this commercial break, and we will be joined very shortly by John Gizzi as well, continuing to keep you updated on the latest developments regarding surrounding the Supreme Court's big ruling today, upholding those subsidies underneath the Affordable Care Act. The court weighing in today in a ruling by 6 in the majority, 3 in the minority, 3 dissenting justices, including Justice Antonin Scalia, who said that the law should now be called SCOTUS Care. Not Obamacare, but SCOTUS Care. More coming up on this and much more here on Newsmax Now, right after this.
I think we made a mistake, that if they would have ruled and adhered to the literal nature of the law, maybe Congress would have had a chance to take up Obamacare again and try to make it less bad or fix the parts of it that are causing so many problems in our society. I really think Obamacare is making all insurance more expensive and taking away choice. So I am disappointed that we've missed an opportunity here.
That is the assessment from Rand Paul, presidential candidate and Kentucky senator. Interesting to note, though, Kentucky, one of the states that did establish a state exchange. Nick Tate sticking around with us. And a very successful one as well. Nick Tate sticking around with us. Also joining us right now is John Gizzi, Newsmax chief Washington correspondent, who we talked to at depth about this issue. And John, we wanted to bring you in here because there's discussion right away about the process of reconciliation, normally used to deal with budgetary matters, was used in 2010 to help amend the Affordable Care Act. And now Republicans in Congress are talking about using reconciliation to send a bill to the president's desk, which would effectively force him to veto it. What are you hearing right now in the halls of Congress about this process?
Well, I'm definitely hearing that not a single Republican in the House or Senate is giving up the battle to amend and eventually upend the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Senator Bill Cassidy, who sponsored one of the alternative measures, the Patient Freedom Act, said that the cost of health insurance is going up, and that's something the Supreme Court can't repeal. He's fully committed to passing his legislation. Reconciliation is backed by a number of senators who said they only need a vote of 51 to send it on to the president's desk. That said, virtually everyone concedes the president will veto it, but it will keep alive the issue of health care for the 2016 campaign, because every one of the 15 Republican presidential prospects will be asked what he or she would have done, and of course they would have signed the alternative. In other words, it's moved from the courtroom of the judiciary to the back rooms of politics.
John, do you think that there's a plan that will emerge, whether the president would veto it or not, that could become the foundation for the debate to kind of set up that debate as we head into the presidential campaign? Or is really reconciliation, you think, the way that Congress is going to move?
Well, I think they'll use a two-pronged attack. Reconciliation at first, but then sculpting an alternative measure. And again, Senator Cassidy's Patient Freedom Act, which ends mandates and nurtures the competition among health care plans, seems to be that's most appealing to the Republicans in the House and Senate. It's offered by Congressman Ralph Abraham in the House. So I say keep your eye on that piece of legislation. But again, let's deal with some hard-nosed reality here. Obamacare is the law of the land. The Supreme Court, by 6-3, upheld the subsidies that go to the states that are in the exchange, those that are out, and the 4 states that have a hybrid of both. Anything that passed will be vetoed. The one thing I can say for sure is this will dominate debate once again as voters go to the polls in primaries and go to meetings and caucuses.
Well, John, you talked about the fact that, and we've talked about this in the past, that a lot of the Republicans did not want to comment on what the Supreme Court was going to do, even though Harry Reid and President Obama were more than happy to do so. But now they're in this situation here, and they have to move forward with something. We had a statement from a unnamed Republican consultant saying that there were a lot of 2016 contenders secretly wishing that this was going to be the case. Do you think that was really the case, or are more folks actually surprised that it was not just a ruling in favor of those subsidies, but a 6-3 ruling.
I would say that they were disappointed because many of them wanted the opportunity to prove they had alternative plans. Senators Johnson of Wisconsin, Hatch of Utah, for example, had what they called bridges to maintain subsidies of some sort. And then, of course, there was Senator Cassidy's Patient Freedom Act, which he said was not a bridge, but a new beginning in the end. So I do not see a lot of relief out there. Now, I can tell you that quite a number of pundits and political consultants are going to conclude that the pressure is off Republicans in the legislative branch to craft an alternative, but the pressure will be on candidates to say what they will do when they move on.
All right, John Gizzi, thanks so much for your insight on all this. And of course, we'll check back with you as those bills progress on Capitol Hill, those alternative bills. John Gizzi, thanks so much. All right, Nick, before we go, let's talk about those presidential candidates. Of course, a lot of them reacting already. Here's Marco Rubio on Twitter. Despite the court's decision, Obamacare is still a bad law that is having a negative impact on our country and on millions of Americans. Of course, you expect that kind of snap judgment from Rubio. Mike Huckabee writing, quote, SCOTUS can't legislate from the bench and pass trillion-dollar tax fix to Obamacare because Congress misread the states, talking about the minutia of the law. And of course, Hillary Clinton, who is excited about this, you talked about this, she says, yes, SCOTUS affirms what we know is true in our hearts. Under the law, health insurance should be affordable and available to all. More to come after this.